Hello and welcome to the garden. Well, some days ago I put out a video where I showed the rust that has appeared on our garlic. That was towards the end of a wet period. Now the garlic's now had a few days of dry weather, so I'm going to lift at least some of it and see what sort of crop we might get. Ideally I would have left this garlic for I think another couple of weeks. You want to leave it until around about half of those leaves have sort of started to yellow and die off. That's roughly the right sort of time to think about lifting it. And I think if it weren't for the rust, I would be leaving this for a couple of weeks yet and hoping to get some bigger bulbs. But the rust and the dodgy weather has forced my hand. Today it's nice and dry, but tomorrow we're forecast for some rain again. So I'm going to get at least the French red variety up. I might leave the Italian for another week. I'll have a look at that in a minute. So it's always a good idea when harvesting the garlic to get properly underneath the bulbs so that you don't damage them. Well, these have certainly put on plenty of root. There we go. Well, that's not too bad. I think that will be quite reasonable. If they're all that sort of size, I wouldn't be too displeased. Yeah, these have just started to split, so that's a pity. I would have thought these could have gone on for another couple of weeks, but I don't know, the weather has been really funny for the alliums this year. This one's slightly weird because that split into two plants. I don't know what I'm going to find under here. It was just a single clove, but as soon as it came up with two shoots. Yeah, I've got a bit of a mutant there. And we've got a tiny one. Now that's not good at all. Well, I'll be able to use that for something, but it's not a great bulb, and there's some really strange things happening here. Oh, now that is a bit better. Yeah, that's going to be a good bulb. I'm not going to clean them up too much, just take the worst of the soil off and then leave them to dry out. That's another one that is growing in a slightly peculiar way, but I'm sure that'll be still pretty good. The cloves themselves are a good size. Well, here's one that really needed another week or two to finish bulbing up, and you can see that most of this foliage is still pretty green. If it weren't for the rust, I wouldn't be lifting this yet. And there's still a reasonable sized bulb on there. On the whole, I'm reasonably happy with these. These are three particularly nice looking specimens. The bulbs are good sized, they're entirely sound. The cloves are really big in these. It smells wonderful, and I'm sure these are going to be great. And I've got plenty of bulbs that are in really good condition, but I've also got quite a few that are smaller or just starting to split open or are otherwise a little bit weird. So these cloves were planted in the autumn, and what you want is for that garlic to go through a period of cold during the winter, and that helps to encourage the cloves that you've planted to divide and form a good sized bulb. When the conditions start to warm up, what you really don't want is for a return to harsh cold weather, and that's exactly what we had this year. So the weather conditions improved, things were starting to grow away, and then we were hit by unseasonably cold conditions in the spring. We've then had a really dry month. April was incredibly dry. May has been pretty wet. So the conditions are all over the place, and that does tend to confuse the plants. If you do a lot of early sowings, as I do here, it's very common for them to bolt if they get a bit of a cold spell. And the alliums are rather prone to getting confused. So here's an example of something that can happen from time to time, and I think this is due to variations in the weather. So I've got a fairly small bulb here. This can still be used, and I think because this is a variety that produces really large cloves, the cloves in this tiny bulb here are actually of a fairly useful size, so there's no problem with that. It's just a little bit sad, but what's happened partway up this stem is I've got cloves forming here, and I don't think I've seen that very often, but it is something that can happen. And the alliums have some really weird behaviors if they get a little bit off balance. So here's something else that can happen in response to rather variable temperatures. These cloves here have started to shoot, and again, this isn't normal behavior, but it can happen. And in this case, it's not a big problem. Most of the bulb is sound. I think I've got a few that are shooting here. I will simply use this one first. In a bad example, these can start to shoot really quite early in the season, and you end up with a whole load of individual cloves that are growing. But it's not a big problem. I think this is the worst example of this. There aren't that many where this has happened, and it could be a lot worse. The entire batch could go this way in a weird year. What I've done in the past, and is very effective, is to grow my garlic in the polytunnel. But we lost our old polytunnel when we renovated the garden last year, and the new one wasn't up until the spring, so we weren't able to do that this year. But in the autumn, I will definitely be planting at least some of our garlic crop in the tunnel, and that tends to suffer a little bit less from these problems, and because the temperatures are better in there, at critical moments you tend to get really good growth and good sized bulbs from growing it under cover. So I will definitely be going back to that this autumn, but overall, given the conditions we've had this year, I'm reasonably happy. So now I'm going to take a look at the Italian variety, because I think that could stay there for a little bit longer. But what I thought I'd do is just lift one or two of those and just see how they look, and maybe take a guess as to whether it's worth keeping them in or lifting them today. Well, I'm feeling a little bit foolish now, because I've just pulled up one of the Italian bulbs, and as you can see, it's not very big. But there's a reason for that. For some reason I thought I had two soft neck varieties, but I've just noticed this has a scape on it. So this is obviously a hard neck variety. I didn't spot that before I pulled this up, and when you see the scapes form, and now that I look more closely, I can see they've all got these scapes on. This is just the flower spike. The soft neck varieties don't throw up a flower spike, and it's probably about the right time to be harvesting those. These, on the other hand, they need another probably 4 weeks or so after the scapes have appeared, so I shouldn't be pulling these up until at least mid-July and probably towards the end of July. In which case I am very relieved that they're not nearly as affected by the rust. There is still some rust on them, and I'm going to have to keep an eye on them, because if they get badly hammered by it, then I will probably lift these bulbs a little bit sooner. As for this one, well, I can use this, but I have rather ruined its potential, but never mind. Anyway, if the Italian garlic is a complete washout, it's not the end of the world, because it looks like we've got plenty of the French red. So there's the garlic harvest so far. I've just roped them together with a bit of string and hung it from the bracing at the top of the greenhouse. So they've got fantastic ventilation strung up this way. It's going to be warm and fairly dry in here. Obviously it can get a little bit humid when it rains, but I think this is probably the best environment I can offer for drying these bulbs. Once they have dried for a few weeks, I will brush off gently any remaining soil, trim the roots and the top growth. I may even string a few of these up properly, but for now they should be quite happy here. And the aroma of fresh garlic is really quite wonderful in the greenhouse here now. But anyway, that is all for this video. Thanks ever so much for watching, and bye for now.